Hello, I'm Jay Rohr, and I'm going to read to you an excerpt from Hoosier Noir One. This is The Haunted Crave Knowing by me. Apologies for being self-indulgent. Rebecca finished her cigarette. The dark cloud she sighed matched her mood. Bills on the coffee table called to mind a ticking time bomb. Topping off her vodka rocks, she heard the doorbell. She considered ignoring it, zero desire to deal with more repo men. Though what remained for them to take, she glanced at the few bits of furniture, figuring the proverbial pound of flesh. The doorbell stopped chiming. Knocking sounded. However, not the door-rattling pound of debt collectors, rather the soft tap of someone unsure if they should. Rebecca answered it. On the front steps stood a young woman in a blue blouse and bell-bottom jeans. "What do you want?" Rebecca said. The woman flinched. I'm sorry. Is Doug Conover here?" "Why?" she said. "I was told he could help me." "He can't help anybody anymore. He's dead." The woman's face fell. "Sorry to bother you." Rebecca watched her walk away. Part of her wanted to let the woman leave. "What sort of trouble are you in?" Rebecca asked. The woman stopped. She chewed her lip. Rebecca sipped her vodka. The woman said, "My name's Joyce. My brother was murdered, you see, and our cousin Luke. Well, he said Mr. Conover could help." Rebecca squeezed an eye shut. "Luke, I want to say Benson?" "That's him." Joyce came back up the steps. "I remember him. Speedway bomber blew his legs off." Joyce said, "After that, Luke didn't think anything could make him happy, but Mr. Conover catching the bomber, that helped." Rebecca nodded. Doug would have been happy to hear that. He loved helping people. So much so, depending on the case, he practically worked for free. She loved him for that, even when it annoyed her, even though it left her near penniless. Word gets around, all the stray dogs come looking for a handout. "Did Mr. Conover have a partner?" Joyce asked. "Someone I could hire?" "Yeah, me." Responding to a skeptical look, Rebecca said, "Doug and I used to work for a PI in Gary. Then we came here to start our own business." A half-truth, but not a whole lie. Rebecca stirred her drink with a finger. No sense telling a stranger the whole story. How the past caught up to them and killed Doug in an alley last winter. She stepped away, leaving the door open, gesturing for Joyce to follow her inside. The two went into the living room. Rebecca offered her the only chair still in the house. Joyce sat, but declined to drink. Then Rebecca asked for the details. Standing in the parking lot, Rebecca eyed the fast food joint. Like similar spots, the Burger Chef on Crawfordsville Road used a garish sign to distract from its banal nature. Bright red belied the assembly line inside, a beige factory cranking out burgers. The way customers streamed in and out, she found it hard to imagine anything grim ever happened here. According to Joyce, her brother David, Molly Simpson, and Pete and Liz Friedmont vanished around midnight on November 17th, 1978. 2 days later, a hiker stumbled on them in a wooded field in nearby Johnson County. The police assumed a robbery gone wrong, investigated a bit, but eventually gave up. A beat-up Ford Cortina shivered into the parking lot. Rebecca waved and the driver parked close. Out stepped a bearded man in a coffee-stained shirt. He introduced himself. "George Smith, Speedway Town Press." "I know, I'm the one who called you." Rebecca shook his hand. "Oh, I'm sorry. When you mentioned a private investigation, I assumed a man would be here." Rebecca pointed at the Burger Chef. "What happened here?" Tragedy. I mean, nothing gets the ink flowing like blood, but they didn't even get to own the front page. Had to share it with that Jonestown mess." "But yeah." George trailed off. Rebecca gestured for him to go on. He continued like a camp counselor reciting a ghost story. She tried not to roll her eyes. Every little bit helped, and reporters often possessed grim pieces the police don't make public, like how the knife broke off in one of the teens, and another, trying to run away, slammed into a tree so hard he ended up drowning in his own blood. He must have been really bolting, Rebecca thought, though her mind orbited the knife. It takes a serious thrust to break a blade. They didn't even They didn't even stab Doug. That severely. George said, 2 of the teens got shot execution style. Just the 2? Yep. George plucked a small notepad out of a back pocket. You think that means anything? Rebecca said, How much did the robbers get? George replied, They took about $581, but left hundreds in change. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. According to George, the cops figured one of the teenagers recognized the robbers. That sealed their fate. What's the last thing they did? George scratched his beard. One of them was taking out the trash. That's the last thing anybody knows for sure. Rebecca headed around back. George called after her, feeling it necessary to mention the crime happened 6 months ago. She ignored him because she already knew. Not that she read about it at the time. Doug's death distracted her back then. When she climbed out of the coffin beside him, the news cycle had moved on to more recent tragedies. Behind the burger chef, she found what she expected, the usual dumpster smelling of rot. A galaxy of cigarette butts littered the ground around it, along with a few last burnt bits of joints. She picked up a roach, sniffed it. The remnant smelled like quality product. Catching up to her, George remarked, Like I said, this all happened 6 months ago. I don't know what you expect to find. However, Rebecca didn't look at the restaurant. She looked out at the surrounding area. She considered how she'd robbed this place. She headed to the nearby alley. Meanwhile, George asked, So, who hired you? I assume it's a victim's family? Rebecca replied, Assume away. She turned back to face the burger chef. It made sense. Someone waited for the trash to be taken out, then rushed the unlocked door. Maybe they even put a gun to whichever employee came out. However, that made things even stranger because it meant someone knew the routine. A planned robbery that left money behind struck her as more than odd. She said, Do the police think it was an opportunistic crime? Drunks or junkies rolled in some spot? George said, Maybe you should ask them. Rebecca frowned. Joyce Carruthers hired me. Aha! George didn't write anything down. She's a pretty girl. Works over at a resort in Roselawn. Nudist resort. He wiggled his eyebrows. That actually inspired a question. 2 of the victims were women. Were they assaulted sexually? George shook his head. Nope. Which isn't to say they were virgins either, at least not Molly Simpson. Word on the street amounted to her being willing to go with anyone in a leather jacket. Rebels on motorcycles always caught her eye. The police questioned her most recent boyfriends. Each owned an airtight alibi. Honestly, I don't think this is ever going to get solved, George said. Rebecca looked at him. Then why are you here? Slow news week. She frowned. George added, I mean, we could have done this over the phone, but I wanted to meet the investigator. For the story. She started back towards Crawfordsville Road. George followed her, rambling something about a nearby cop bar. If she wanted to get a drink, they could wait there for a few police to get off work. He'd help her ask questions. What do you say? George asked. First round is on me. He smiled. She looked up and down the street. A few businesses dotted the sides of the road. Each seemed easier to rob than a stray burger joint. It seemed to her that made Burger Chef a conscious decision. A lone pickup rattled by, a thin cloud of rust flying off behind it. The street struck her as a road to nowhere. The suburban sprawl peppering it just made the impression worse. Doug wouldn't have agreed. He'd find the beauty in it. So, how about a drink? George said. She said, I have work to do. He held up his hands. If you change your mind, Indy Rose, that's where I'll be. She watched him drive away. Then she got into a Buick Electra, borrowed from a neighbor, and consulted her notes. Joyce provided a few addresses, victims' friends and family. The police probably interviewed them, but Rebecca knew. Not everyone tells the cops the whole truth. That's just a little bit, a little start, a little teaser. If you want to know what happens with the rest of the story, you're going to have to pick up your own copy of Hoosier Noir #1. And I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. There are fantastic stories in here from a lot of excellent authors. And apologies in advance for a couple of those stumbles I made while reading. I have been drinking. But it's not noir without a little bit of whiskey. Anyway, my best to you and yours, and I hope you all stay safe. Good evening.